I never thought a flag would become the biggest fight of my life, but standing in my driveway that Tuesday morning in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at the letter from the Homeowners Association, I knew I was in for a battle. The letter was printed on that cheap copier paper that always screams authority without substance, and the words made my blood boil. Violation notice. Unauthorized flag display exceeding community standards. Fine. $250. Daily accumulation until compliance. I read it 3 times, each time getting angrier. My American flag, the one I'd hung with pride after my father passed away last month, was apparently too big for the Desert Bloom Community Association's delicate sensibilities. My name is Kyle Martinez, and I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I work as a mechanical engineer at an aerospace firm, keep my lawn trimmed, never blast music late at night, and generally mind my own business. But this was pushing buttons I didn't even know I had. The flag wasn't some massive commercial banner. It was a standard 3 by 5 foot flag that I'd mounted on a proper flagpole in my front yard, following all the respectful protocols my father had taught me. He was a Navy veteran, 26 years of service, and that flag meant something to both of us. When he died of a heart attack 4 weeks ago, hanging that flag felt like keeping a piece of him alive. I looked up at it now, rippling gently in the Arizona morning breeze, the red, white, and blue bright against the cloudless sky. Too big. The words echoed in my head like an insult. My phone rang, interrupting my anger. It was my best friend Marcus from work. "Hey man, you coming in today?" he asked. Yeah, I'll be there. Just dealing with some HOA nonsense." "Oh no. What now? Did you paint your mailbox the wrong shade of beige?" I almost laughed despite my mood. "They're saying my American flag is too big." There was a pause on the line. "Your what?" "My flag. The one I put up after Dad died. Apparently it violates their community standards." "That's insane. Can they even do that?" "That's what I'm about to find out." I told Marcus I'd be in later and hung up. Then I did what any reasonable person would do in 2026. I started Googling. HOA American flag restrictions. Can HOA ban flags? Federal flag laws HOA. The search results were enlightening and infuriating in equal measure. Turns out, there was something called the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. Federal law. It specifically stated that HOAs couldn't prohibit homeowners from displaying the American flag, though they could impose reasonable restrictions on time, place, and manner. Reasonable. That word kept coming up. I measured my flag again just to be sure. 3 feet by 5 feet. Standard residential size. The pole was 8 feet tall, professionally installed in my front yard about 10 feet from the sidewalk. Nothing about it was unreasonable. I'd seen bigger flags on half the houses in neighboring communities. The HOA office opened at 9. I checked my watch. 8:30. I had time to get really annoyed before I made the call. At exactly 9:01, I dialed the number listed on the violation notice. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with that particular brand of artificial sweetness that immediately puts you on guard. "Desert Bloom Community Association, this is Brenda speaking. How may I help you today?" "Hi, this is Kyle Martinez from 4782 Saguaro Lane. I received a violation notice about my flag." "Oh yes, Mr. Martinez." The sweetness evaporated instantly, replaced by clipped efficiency. "The flag must be removed or reduced to acceptable dimensions by Friday or fines will accumulate at $50 per day." What acceptable dimensions? The notice doesn't specify. Community standards dictate flags no larger than 2 feet by 3 feet. I felt my jaw clench. That's a garden flag size. I have a standard residential American flag, 3 by 5 feet, which exceeds our standards, Mr. Martinez. The rules are quite clear. Actually, I've been reading about federal law, and there's something called the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act that says you can't prohibit homeowners from displaying the American flag. Brenda's voice took on a tone I'd come to recognize, the HOA voice of absolute authority. Mr. Martinez, when you purchased your home, you agreed to abide by our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Those are legally binding. We're not prohibiting your flag, we're simply requiring reasonable size restrictions for aesthetic uniformity. Aesthetic uniformity. It's the American flag. Our community has standards, Mr. Martinez. If we allow you to have an oversized flag, what's next? Everyone will want one and the neighborhood will look cluttered and chaotic. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge of the board. That would be our HOA president, Patricia Henderson. She's actually the one who filed your violation report. She drives through the neighborhood every Monday and Thursday documenting violations. Of course she does, I thought. Can I have her contact information? I can pass along your concerns to Mrs. Henderson and have her call you back. When? At her earliest convenience. This was going nowhere fast. Fine. Please tell Mrs. Henderson that I'll be filing a formal dispute of this violation, and I'd appreciate speaking with her as soon as possible. I'll pass that along. Have a nice day, Mr. Martinez. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, feeling like I'd just been patted on the head and dismissed. The feeling didn't sit well. I ended up going into work late, my mind still churning over the conversation. Marcus found me at lunch in the break room, staring at my sandwich without really seeing it. "So what happened with the flag thing?" he asked, sliding into the chair across from me. I filled him in on the morning's events. He listened, his expression growing more incredulous by the minute. 2 by 3 feet. That's ridiculous. My kid's bedroom has bigger flags than that. Tell me about it. And this Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, she's the one who reported me. Apparently she drives around looking for violations. Marcus rolled his eyes. Of course she does. Every HOA has one of those. My sister dealt with one in her neighborhood in Gilbert. The woman tried to fine her for having the wrong color roses in her front yard. What color were they? Pink. They were supposed to be red or white only. I shook my head. This is crazy. I'm talking about the American flag. This should be protected. So what are you going to do? I don't know yet. Maybe I need to talk to a lawyer. That seems extreme for a flag. It's not just about the flag anymore, Marcus. It's about them thinking they can push people around with made-up rules that violate federal law. He studied me for a moment. This is about your dad too, isn't it? I looked away. Marcus knew me too well. Yeah, maybe. That flag means something to me. Dad served this country for over 2 decades. The idea that some HOA busybody thinks she can tell me to take it down because it ruins her aesthetic vision. No. I'm not doing it. Then fight it, but be smart about it. These HOA people can make your life miserable if you're not careful. He was right, of course, but I was already committed. I spent my lunch break researching lawyers in Scottsdale who dealt with HOA disputes. There were more than I expected, which probably said something depressing about the state of HOA relations in general. I found one whose website specifically mentioned flag disputes and federal protection laws. Her name was Rebecca Steinberg, and her office was in Old Town Scottsdale, not far from my work. I called and got an appointment for Thursday afternoon. The rest of Tuesday and all of Wednesday passed without any contact from Patricia Henderson. Thursday morning, I woke up to find another letter stuck to my door. This one informed me that since I'd failed to comply with the first notice, I was now being fined $50 per day, starting today, until the violation was corrected. It was signed by Patricia Henderson in flowing cursive that probably took her longer to write than the actual message. I photographed the letter and brought it with me to Rebecca Steinberg's office that afternoon. Her office was in a converted house, warm and professional without being intimidating. Rebecca herself was in her mid-40s, with short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She shook my hand firmly and gestured to a chair across from her desk. "So, Mr. Martinez, tell me about your flag." I laid out the whole situation, from my father's death to the violation notices to the phone call with Brenda to the escalating fines. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and nodded. "Okay, first, I'm sorry about your father. Second, your HOA is absolutely wrong and they're about to find that out." Relief flooded through me. So I'm right, they can't do this. Not only can they not do this, but they're violating federal law by trying. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is very clear. Let me pull up the exact language. She turned her computer monitor so I could see it and pulled up the text of the law. Here, look at this section. A condominium association, cooperative association, or residential real estate management association may not adopt or enforce any policy or enter into any agreement that would restrict or prevent a member of the association from displaying the flag of the United States on residential property within the association, with respect to which such member has a separate ownership interest or a right to exclusive possession or use. "So they can't stop me," I said, feeling vindicated. "Correct. Now they can impose reasonable restrictions on time, place, and manner of display, but those restrictions have to actually be reasonable. A 2 by 3 foot maximum for the American flag is not reasonable by any stretch. That's a clear attempt to effectively prohibit the display while technically claiming they're not prohibiting it." "So what do I do?" Rebecca smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who knew she had an ironclad case. "You let me write a letter to your HOA. We'll cite the federal law, explain in very clear terms why their policy is illegal, and demand they rescind all violations and fines immediately. We'll also demand they revise their flag policy to comply with federal law. And if they don't, then we file suit in federal court and they lose badly, and probably end up paying your legal fees on top of it. But honestly, I don't think it'll come to that. Most HOAs back down fast once they realize they're on the wrong side of federal law. They might have a power trip, but they're not usually stupid enough to take an unwinnable fight to court." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "How much is this going to cost me? Initial consultation and letter, $500. If it goes further than that, we'll discuss it, but like I said, I doubt it will. These cases usually resolve at the letter stage." $500 felt steep, but the principle was worth it. And if they were charging me $50 a day in fines, I'd be past that amount in less than 2 weeks anyway. "Let's do it." Rebecca smiled, this time genuinely. "Good. I'll have the letter drafted and sent by tomorrow afternoon. Certified mail so they can't claim they didn't receive it. Do you have copies of all the violation notices?" I handed over the photos I'd taken. She nodded approvingly. "Perfect. This is going to be straightforward. Try not to worry, Mr. Martinez. Your flag isn't going anywhere." I left her office feeling better than I had in days. For the first time since this started, I felt like I had some power back in the situation. Friday morning, I got a phone call at 7:30 a.m. I was barely awake, stumbling toward my coffee maker when my phone started buzzing. Unknown number, Scottsdale area code. Hello. Mr. Martinez, this is Patricia Henderson from the Desert Bloom Community Association. I was instantly awake. Her voice was exactly what I expected, tight nasal with an edge of self-righteousness that made my teeth hurt. Mrs. Henderson, I've been trying to reach you. Yes. Well, I've been very busy managing this community. I understand you have some concerns about your violation notice. I do. My flag is protected by federal law. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act specifically prevents HOAs from prohibiting the display of the American flag. Mr. Martinez, I'm familiar with the law. We're not prohibiting your flag. We're simply enforcing reasonable size restrictions for community aesthetics. 2 by 3 feet isn't reasonable for an American flag. That's a garden flag size. That's your opinion. Our board has determined that anything larger creates visual clutter and diminishes property values. I could feel my blood pressure rising. Property values. You think an American flag diminishes property values? An oversized one, yes. Mr. Martinez, every homeowner in this community agreed to certain standards when they moved in. You don't get to ignore those standards just because you feel like it. I'm not ignoring anything. I'm following federal law, which supersedes your HOA rules. Patricia's voice turned icy. Mr. Martinez, I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. I know the law quite well. You're welcome to file an appeal with the board, but I can tell you right now it will be denied. The rules exist for a reason, and we enforce them equally for everyone. I've already consulted with a lawyer, Mrs. Henderson. You're going to be receiving a letter shortly explaining exactly why your policy is illegal. There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a different quality, brittle and sharp. Is that a threat, Mr. Martinez? It's a fact. Federal law protects my right to display my flag. If you continue to try to fine me or force me to take it down, you're violating that law. We'll see what the board has to say about that, and in the meantime, your fines continue to accumulate. You're at $150 as of today. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, angrier than before. The woman was unbelievable. 8 years as HOA president apparently convinced her she was some kind of community dictator. My coffee forgotten, I texted Rebecca Steinberg's office number to let her know about the call. She responded an hour later saying the letter was already prepared and would be sent out today. She also advised me not to engage with Patricia Henderson again directly, but to refer all communication through her office. That weekend felt surreal. I went about my normal routine, grocery shopping, hitting the gym, grabbing dinner with Marcus and some other friends, but the whole time I was aware of the flag flying in my front yard like a beacon. Saturday morning, I noticed a car driving slowly past my house. A white Mercedes SUV, pristine and probably worth more than I made in 6 months. The driver was a woman with short blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a phone held up like she was taking photos. Patricia Henderson had to be. I watched from my living room window as she made 2 passes, clearly documenting my violation for her records. The petness was almost impressive. Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my neighbor from 2 houses down, an older man named George who I occasionally chatted with when we both happened to be checking mail at the same time. "Kyle, hey, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" George glanced at my flag and then back to me. "Look, I heard through the grapevine that you're having some trouble with the HOA over your flag. Word travels fast. It's a small community, and Patricia has a big mouth. She's been telling people you're refusing to follow the rules and creating problems. I felt my jaw clench. That's not exactly accurate, I figured. Look, I just wanted to say I think what they're doing is garbage. Your flag looks great. My dad was Army, so I get it. And for what it's worth, you're not the first person Patricia's gone after. Yeah, George nodded. 3 years ago, she tried to fine the Johnsons on Cactus Drive for having their grandkids' toys visible in their backyard. Said it violated the aesthetic standards. They fought it, and she made their lives hell for months. Eventually, they just moved. That's insane. That's Patricia. She treats this HOA like her personal fiefdom. Most people just go along with it because it's easier than fighting. But I wanted you to know that not everyone agrees with her. If you fight this, you'll have some support. Thanks, George. That actually means a lot. He nodded and headed back toward his house, leaving me with a lot to think about. How many other people had Patricia Henderson bullied? How many had just given up rather than deal with the hassle? Monday morning, Rebecca called me at work. The letter was delivered this morning. They signed for it at 9:42 a.m. What happens now? Now we wait. They have a legal obligation to respond. I gave them 10 business days to rescind the violations and confirm in writing that they're revising their flag policy to comply with federal law. And if they don't respond, then we file suit. But my bet is they'll respond. This letter is pretty clear about the consequences of non-compliance. What kind of consequences? Financial penalties, legal fees, potential injunctive relief. And the court could even require them to pay punitive damages if they're found to have acted in bad faith. HOAs are typically judgment-proof to their individual members, but a lawsuit like this could cost them tens of thousands in legal fees, plus they'd have to raise fees on everyone to cover it. Most boards don't want that kind of liability. I thanked her and went back to work, but I couldn't focus. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting it to be either Rebecca or Patricia Henderson. The call came Tuesday afternoon. Not from Patricia, but from Brenda at the HOA office. Her artificial sweetness was back in full force. Mr. Martinez, this is Brenda from Desert Bloom Community Association. The board has received your attorney's letter and would like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss the matter. A meeting? Yes, this Thursday at 6 p.m. at the community center. The full board will be present. I had no idea if this was a good idea or a trap. Let me talk to my attorney and get back to you. The board is offering this meeting as a courtesy, Mr. Martinez. They're hoping to resolve this amicably without further legal action. I'll call you back. I hung up and immediately called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring and I explained the invitation. Interesting, she said thoughtfully. They want to negotiate. That's actually a good sign. It means they're taking the letter seriously. Should I go? Only if I go with you. And I'll bill you for the time, but I think it's worth it. These meetings can go sideways fast if you're not careful. They'll try to intimidate you or get you to agree to something that sounds reasonable but isn't. Okay, let's do it. Rebecca called Brenda back and confirmed we'd both be at the Thursday meeting. Brenda's tone was noticeably cooler when she realized I was bringing my lawyer. The next 2 days dragged by. I found myself obsessively checking the mailbox, expecting more violation notices or threats. None came. Wednesday evening, I was in my garage organizing tools to keep busy when Marcus stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. Thought you might need this before the big meeting tomorrow, he said, handing me a cold bottle. We sat in my driveway, watching the sun set over the desert hills, and I filled him in on everything that had happened since we last talked. Man, this is wild, Marcus said, shaking his head. All over a flag. It's not really about the flag anymore, I admitted. It's about standing up to people who think they can push you around just because they have some imaginary authority. Your dad would be proud. I looked up at the flag, now bathed in the orange-gold light of the Arizona sunset. Yeah, I think he would be. Thursday at 5:30, I met Rebecca in the parking lot of the Desert Bloom Community Center. It was a bland, stucco building painted the same beige as every other structure in the neighborhood, with a red tile roof and landscaping that probably required a team of gardeners to maintain the artificial perfection. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, carrying a leather briefcase that looked appropriately lawyerly. "As ready as I'll ever be." We walked in together. The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, which I found both absurd and telling. A long table at the front held 5 chairs, 3 of which were occupied. The center chair held a woman I recognized from her drive-bys, Patricia Henderson. She was probably in her late 50s, with that overly maintained appearance that spoke of too much money and too much time. Her blonde hair was lacquered into submission, her makeup severe, her expression glacial. To her left sat a balding man in his 60s wearing a polo shirt and khakis, looking uncomfortable. To her right was another woman, younger, maybe 40, with dark hair and a nervous energy. "Mr. Martinez," Patricia said without preamble, "and you must be Miss Steinberg. Please sit." She gestured to 2 chairs facing the board table. The power dynamic was deliberate and obvious. We sat. "Thank you for meeting with us," Rebecca said smoothly. "I trust you received and reviewed my letter." "We did," Patricia said crisply. "The board has discussed your claims extensively. We disagree with your interpretation of the law." "There's no interpretation involved, Mrs. Henderson. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is quite clear. The act allows for reasonable restrictions on manner of display. We believe our size restrictions are reasonable." Rebecca opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. "Let me read you something from case law. This is from a 2018 decision in the Ninth Circuit, which covers Arizona. Restrictions on flag size that effectively diminish the visibility and dignity of the flag to the point where its display becomes meaningless constitute a de facto prohibition and violate the act. Your 2 by 3 foot restriction makes a flag barely visible from the street. That's a de facto prohibition." The balding man shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we could consider raising the maximum size slightly." Patricia shot him a withering look. "Carl, we have standards for a reason." "Mrs. Henderson," Rebecca continued, her voice taking on an edge, "let me be very clear about the position you're putting your HOA in. If you continue to pursue these violations and fines against my client, we will file suit in federal court. You will lose. The case law is unambiguous. And when you lose, you'll be liable for Mr. Martinez's legal fees, potential statutory damages, and your own legal defense costs. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars at minimum. Is that really the hill you want to die on over a standard-size American flag?" "This isn't about one flag," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. "This is about maintaining order and standards in our community. If we let Mr. Martinez ignore our rules, what's to stop everyone else?" "Federal law," Rebecca said flatly. "That's what stops it from being a free-for-all. The flag is specifically protected. Other decorations, displays, and modifications are not. You can still enforce your other rules." The younger woman on the board spoke up for the first time. "What if we revise the policy to allow larger American flags specifically? Would that resolve this?" Rebecca nodded. "That would be a start, yes. The policy would need to allow for standard residential flag sizes, minimum 3 by 5 feet, with reasonable placement restrictions. No prohibitions on properly mounted flags in front yards." Patricia's face was turning an interesting shade of red. This is ridiculous. We're the governing authority of this community. We have the right to set standards. You have the right to set standards that don't violate federal law, Rebecca corrected. You don't have the right to override congressional legislation because you don't like the aesthetics. I've been president of this board for 8 years, Patricia snapped. I've maintained this community's property values and reputation through careful enforcement of our standards. I'm not going to have that undermined by one resident who thinks the rules don't apply to him. I'd been quiet up to this point, but that was too much. The rules don't apply when they're illegal, Mrs. Henderson. This isn't about me thinking I'm special. This is about federal law protecting every American's right to display our flag. My father served this country for 26 years. That flag honors his service and his memory. I'm not taking it down because you think it's too big. Your personal feelings don't supersede community standards, Patricia shot back. Federal law does, I said firmly. Carl, the balding man, cleared his throat. Patricia, maybe we should consider revising the policy. If the law is really this clear, we're exposing the HOA to significant liability. Carl's right, the younger woman added. I don't want to raise everyone's fees to pay for a lawsuit we're going to lose anyway. Patricia looked between them, her expression tight with barely controlled anger. Fine. The board will take this under advisement and vote on a revised policy at our next regular meeting. When is that? Rebecca asked. 2 weeks from yesterday. Rebecca shook her head. Not acceptable. My client has already been charged illegal fines, and you're continuing to accrue daily penalties against him. This needs to be resolved within 72 hours or we file suit. 72 hours. That's absurd. We need time to properly draft a new policy, circulate it to all homeowners, and vote on it. You have a lawyer on retainer, I assume? Rebecca asked. It wasn't really a question. Have them draft the revised policy. It shouldn't take more than an hour. You can hold an emergency board meeting to vote on it. The homeowner notification can come after. This is not complicated, Mrs. Henderson. You're simply bringing your policies into compliance with existing federal law. The standoff lasted another few seconds before Carl spoke again. I motion that we hold an emergency session Friday evening to vote on a revised flag policy that complies with federal law. Second, the younger woman said immediately. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. All in favor. Carl and the other woman raised their hands. Patricia didn't. Motion carries, Carl said, looking relieved. We'll meet tomorrow at 6 p.m. to finalize the new policy. Excellent, Rebecca said, standing. I'll expect written confirmation of the revised policy and complete rescission of all fines and violations against Mr. Martinez by end of business Monday. If that doesn't happen, we file suit Tuesday morning. We left the community center, and I didn't realize how tense I'd been until we were back in the parking lot and I felt my shoulders relax. That went better than I expected, Rebecca said. Really? It felt pretty hostile to me. Oh, it was. But the other 2 board members are on your side, which means Patricia is outvoted. She knows it, which is why she's so angry. People like her hate losing control. Do you really think they'll follow through? Yes. Carl and the other woman, whose name I didn't catch, clearly don't want to deal with a lawsuit. They'll make sure the policy gets revised. Patricia might drag her feet, but she's outnumbered. I felt a weight lifting. So it's over, probably. I'll wait for the written confirmation before I say it's definitely over. But yes, this should be resolved. We shook hands, and I drove home feeling lighter than I had in over a week. When I pulled into my driveway, I looked up at my flag, still flying proudly in the early evening breeze, and smiled. Friday evening came and went without any word from the HOA. I spent the weekend trying not to obsess over my phone, with mixed success. Marcus dragged me out to a Suns game Saturday night, which helped distract me. But Sunday I was back to checking my email every 20 minutes. Monday morning at 10:15, an email arrived from the Desert Bloom Community Association. The sender was Carl, not Patricia, which I took as a good sign. The email was brief and formal. The board had voted 3-1 to revise the flag policy to allow American flags up to 5 by 8 feet with reasonable placement restrictions. All violations and fines against my property had been rescinded and expunged from my record. The new policy had been filed with the county and would be sent to all homeowners within the week. I called Rebecca immediately. "That's perfect," she said when I read her the email. 3-1 vote means Patricia voted against it, but she lost. Send me a copy of that email for our records, but yes, you're done. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Seriously, I couldn't have done this without you. You would have figured it out eventually, but I'm glad I could help speed things along. Enjoy your flag, Kyle. I hung up and just sat for a minute, processing the fact that it was actually over. Then I forwarded the email to Marcus with a single word. 1. His response came back immediately. Drinks tonight to celebrate. The celebration was necessary and cathartic. Marcus, our friend Devin, and I hit a sports bar in Old Town Scottsdale and spent the evening rehashing the whole saga. They were both outraged on my behalf and impressed that I'd actually fought back and won. Most people would have just taken the flag down, Devin said, nursing his third beer. It's easier than dealing with the hassle. That's what they count on, I said. People like Patricia Henderson get away with their little power trips because most people don't want to fight. But sometimes you have to fight, especially when you're right. Deep thoughts from the flag warrior, Marcus teased, but he raised his glass. Seriously though, good for you, man. Your dad would have been proud. We clinked glasses and I felt a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. Dad would have been proud. He taught me to stand up for what was right, to not back down from bullies, and to respect the flag he'd served under. This whole fight had been about honoring those lessons as much as it had been about the actual flag. The next few weeks passed quietly. The new policy was distributed to all homeowners, and I noticed several of my neighbors put up larger flags shortly after. George stopped by one afternoon with a knowing smile and told me that Patricia had been unusually quiet at the last community meeting. "I think you took some of the wind out of her sails," he said. "She's not used to losing." "Everybody needs to lose sometimes," I replied. "Builds character." About a month after everything was resolved, I was leaving for work one morning when I noticed Patricia Henderson's white Mercedes driving slowly down my street. She slowed even more as she passed my house, and I could see her looking at my flag. Our eyes met for just a second. I gave her a small nod. She didn't acknowledge it, just kept driving, but something in her expression had changed. Not friendliness exactly, but maybe a grudging acceptance, or at least recognition that I wasn't going to be pushed around. The irony wasn't lost on me that this whole situation had probably made me more politically engaged with the HOA than I'd ever been before. I started attending the monthly community meetings, partly to keep an eye on Patricia, but also because I realized that people like her only maintained power when reasonable people didn't pay attention. At the first meeting I attended, Carl approached me during the coffee break. "Kyle, glad you're here. Listen, I wanted to apologize for how all that flag business went down. Patricia can be a bit overzealous sometimes." "A bit," I said diplomatically. "The thing is, we have 2 board positions opening up in the fall elections. Have you ever thought about running?" I almost laughed. "Me, on the HOA board? Why not? You clearly care about the community, you're willing to stand up for what's right, and honestly, we could use some balance to Patricia's more rigid approach. I thought about it. The idea of spending more time dealing with HOA politics was about as appealing as a root canal. But then again, if people like me didn't get involved, people like Patricia Henderson would continue to run things unchecked. I'll think about it, I told Carl. The community meetings were educational, in a depressing sort of way. Patricia ran them with an iron fist, cutting off discussion she didn't like, pushing through votes quickly before people could object, and generally treating the other board members and attending homeowners like subjects rather than equals. But she was also clearly on the defensive now, less aggressive than she had probably been before my flag battle. During one particularly contentious discussion about restrictions on holiday decorations, I spoke up for the first time. Mrs. Henderson, with respect, are we sure these restrictions are necessary? And more importantly, are they legal? We just went through a whole situation with the flag policy where the HOA's rules were superseded by federal law. I'd hate for us to create more policies that put the community at legal risk. You could have heard a pin drop. Patricia stared at me with barely concealed hostility, but several other homeowners nodded in agreement. All of our policies are vetted by legal counsel, Patricia said stiffly. Great. Could we see that vetting? I think it would help the community feel confident that we're not going to end up in another legal situation. Carl jumped in. That's actually a reasonable request. Patricia, could we get a copy of the legal review for the proposed holiday decoration restrictions? Patricia looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. I'll have Brenda send them out to the board. After the meeting, several homeowners came up to thank me for speaking up. One woman, probably in her 70s, shook my hand firmly. I've lived here for 12 years, and Patricia has been a tyrant the entire time. It's nice to see someone willing to push back. Thank you. That conversation stayed with me. How many people in this community had felt bullied or pushed around by Patricia's version of HOA governance? How many had just quietly complied with unreasonable demands because fighting seemed too hard? I started doing some research on HOA law in Arizona, not just about flags but about governance in general. What I learned was eye-opening. HOAs had significant power, but that power came with responsibilities and limitations that many boards either didn't know about or chose to ignore. Boards were required to act in good faith, to follow their own governing documents, to provide due process for violations, and to avoid arbitrary or discriminatory enforcement. Patricia's pattern of driving around looking for violations to report was actually potentially problematic. Enforcement was supposed to be consistent and based on actual complaints or obvious issues, not personal vendettas disguised as community standards. The more I learned, the more I realized that Carl had been right. I needed to run for the board. Not because I wanted to spend my free time dealing with HOA drama, but because communities needed engaged, reasonable people in governance positions to balance out the Patricia Hendersons of the world. When nominations opened up in August, I threw my hat in the ring. So did 3 other homeowners, including a woman named Linda who had similar concerns about Patricia's management style. The election would be in October, with the top 2 vote-getters winning the open positions. Patricia clearly saw me running as a personal affront. At the September meeting, she went out of her way to shoot down every comment I made, no matter how reasonable. When I suggested we get multiple bids for the upcoming landscape contract renewal, instead of automatically using the same company we'd used for years, she acted like I'd proposed burning down the community center. We have a long-standing relationship with Desert Perfection Landscaping, she said icily. They know our standards and meet them consistently. I'm sure they do excellent work, I replied calmly. But as fiduciaries of the homeowner's money, isn't it our responsibility to make sure we're getting competitive pricing? Getting a few comparison bids would only take a couple weeks and might save the community thousands of dollars. Carl and the other reasonable board member, whose name I'd learned was Jennifer, both agreed with me. Patricia was outvoted again, and I could see the fury in her eyes. She was used to being the unquestioned authority, and my presence was disrupting that dynamic. The election campaign, such as it was, consisted mainly of a candidate's statement in the community newsletter and a Meet the Candidates session at the October community meeting. My statement was simple. I believed in reasonable, fair governance that served all homeowners, respected legal boundaries, and prioritized the community's well-being over rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules. Patricia gave a speech at the meet and greet about the importance of maintaining standards and not letting the community slide into chaos. It was clearly directed at me, though she never mentioned me by name. Some people think rules are optional, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. They think that if they don't personally agree with a rule, they don't have to follow it. But that's not how communities work. Without standards and consistent enforcement, property values decline, and we all suffer. I let her finish before responding. I agree that rules are important, Mrs. Henderson. But rules have to be legal, reasonable, and applied fairly. They should serve the community's interests, not just give the board power for the sake of power. And when rules conflict with federal or state law, they need to be changed, not enforced blindly. That's not chaos. That's good governance. The applause that followed my statement was noticeably louder than what Patricia had received. I tried not to let it show on my face, but I felt a small surge of satisfaction. The election results came out a week later. Linda and I had won the 2 open positions by a comfortable margin. Patricia sent a terse email welcoming us to the board and noting that the next meeting would be the following Thursday. That Thursday meeting was my first as an actual board member, and the dynamic was noticeably different. Patricia was chillier than ever, but Carl and Jennifer were welcoming, and Linda and I quickly found ourselves aligned on most issues. The first major issue we tackled was revising the violation enforcement process. Under Patricia's system, she personally drove around looking for violations, reported them to Brenda, who sent out notices, and homeowners had to appeal to the board if they wanted to contest it. The problem was that the process gave Patricia enormous discretion about what to report and when, and there was no transparency about how decisions were made. I proposed a new system where violations would only be reported based on actual neighbor complaints or obvious safety issues, not personal aesthetic preferences. Homeowners would get a warning before a fine, and they'd have the right to appear before the board to explain their situation before any fines were imposed. Patricia fought the proposal tooth and nail. This will create chaos. People will ignore violations because they know they'll just get a warning first. Standards will collapse. Or, Linda countered, people will appreciate being treated like adults instead of children, and they'll be more likely to comply voluntarily. The current system breeds resentment and conflict. The vote was 3-2, with Patricia and one other member voting against it. The new enforcement policy passed. Over the next several months, the board meetings became a battleground between Patricia's rigid enforcement philosophy and the more collaborative approach that Linda, Carl, Jennifer, and I favored. We revised several outdated policies, got competitive bids for community services, and implemented a more transparent budgeting process. property values didn't collapse. The community didn't descend into chaos. If anything, the atmosphere improved. I noticed more people attending meetings, and the complaints dropped significantly. Patricia became increasingly isolated on the board. At the 6-month mark, she announced she wouldn't be seeking re-election when her term ended the following year. Carl told me privately that she was furious about losing control and was considering moving to a different community where she could start fresh. "Good riddance," George said when I mentioned it to him one afternoon. "That woman has made life miserable for too many people for too long." But I didn't celebrate Patricia's departure. The truth was, I'd learned something from the whole experience. People like Patricia Henderson weren't cartoon villains. They were people who genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, maintaining standards, protecting property values, preserving order. The problem was that their methods were authoritarian, and their priorities were skewed toward control rather than community. The real solution wasn't driving out the Patricia Hendersons of the world. It was making sure there were enough reasonable voices involved in governance to balance them out. My flag still flies in my front yard every day. It's faded a bit now, after more than a year of Arizona sun and wind, and I'll probably replace it soon. But every time I see it, I think about my dad, about the principle of standing up for what's right, and about the importance of not letting bullies win, even small-time HOA bullies. Marcus still jokes that I became the thing I fought against, an HOA board member obsessed with community governance. I tell him there's a difference between being engaged in making sure your community is run fairly and being a petty tyrant who gets off on wielding tiny amounts of power. The real victory wasn't just keeping my flag up. It was learning that systems only work when good people participate in them. Patricia Henderson had been able to run the HOA like her personal kingdom for 8 years because most people didn't pay attention or didn't want to deal with the hassle of fighting back. One person standing up had inspired others to get involved. Linda ran for the board because of my flag fight. 2 other homeowners started attending meetings regularly and asking tough questions. The community became more engaged, more aware, and ultimately better governed. On the anniversary of my dad's death, I held a small memorial in my backyard. Marcus came, along with George, Linda, and a few other neighbors who'd become friends through the HOA saga. We raised glasses to Dad, to service, to standing up for principles, and to the idea that sometimes fighting over something as simple as a flag can change more than you'd expect. "Your dad would have loved this whole story," Marcus said, looking up at the flag snapping in the evening breeze. "Yeah," I agreed. "He would have told me I was crazy for fighting an HOA over a flag, and then he would have been right there fighting alongside me." That was the truth of it. The flag represented something bigger than fabric and thread. It represented the principles Dad had served for, the idea that sometimes you have to stand up to power, even petty power, and the belief that ordinary people have the right to honor their values without being bullied into compliance. Patricia Henderson probably still thinks I was the unreasonable one, that I disrupted a well-managed community over a trivial issue. But she's wrong. The issue was never trivial. It was about freedom, about rights, about the rule of law, and about standing up for those things when it would have been easier to just comply. The letter from Rebecca Steinberg citing federal law did more than make the HOA back down fast. It reminded everyone involved that there are limits to authority, that rights matter, and that sometimes the little guy wins. My flag flies a little higher because of that fight, and every morning when I see it, I remember that it was worth it. Every single moment of frustration, every tense meeting, every angry email from Patricia Henderson, It was all worth it to prove that principle matters more than convenience. The Desert Bloom Community Association is a better place now, not because Patricia Henderson left, but because enough people started paying attention and demanding better governance. The flag was just the beginning. It was the catalyst that woke up a dormant community and reminded us all that we have the power to shape the places where we live. And if another Patricia Henderson ever tries to take over, there will be people ready to stand up and say no. Because that's what communities should be. Places where people look out for each other, respect each other's rights, and work together instead of being ruled by petty tyrants with too much time and too little empathy. My flag still flies, and it always will.